The autumn wind carried golden leaves across the quiet streets of Willowbrook as Nathan Pierce stepped out of his luxury sedan. 15 years had passed since he last stood on this familiar ground, and yet everything looked remarkably unchanged. The old church steeple still dominated the skyline, the corner pharmacy still had its weathered sign, and the maple trees lining Riverside Avenue still formed a canopy of amber and crimson overhead. Nathan adjusted his tailored jacket and took a deep breath. At 38 years old, he had built an empire in commercial real estate that spanned 3 states. His name appeared regularly in business journals, and his net worth had long since crossed into 8 figures. But standing here in his hometown, none of that seemed to matter. He felt like the uncertain young man who had left with nothing but ambition and a one-way bus ticket. His mother had insisted on celebrating her 40th wedding anniversary in Willowbrook, the place where she and his late father had built their life together. Nathan couldn't refuse her request, even though returning meant confronting memories he had carefully locked away. Memories of simpler times, of dreams not yet realized, and of a girl with kind eyes who had once meant everything to him. The celebration begins inside the community hall, buzzing with familiar faces, most of them aged by time, but still recognizable. Nathan moved through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on his success. People spoke about his achievements with pride, claiming him as Willowbrook's greatest success story. He smiled politely, answered questions about his business ventures, and tried not to feel like an imposter in his expensive suit. Then he saw her across the room, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily Hart stood near the refreshment table, pouring punch into crystal cups. She wore a simple forest green dress that complemented her auburn hair, which fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Time had been gentle with her, adding maturity to her features without diminishing the warmth that had always drawn people to her. She looked up, and their eyes met with the force of a lightning strike. For a moment neither moved. The noise of the party faded into background static as 15 years collapsed into nothing. Emily set down the punch ladle with trembling hands, and Nathan found himself walking toward her as if pulled by invisible strings. Emily's voice was softer than he remembered, but no less familiar. Nathan couldn't find words adequate for the moment, so he simply said her name like a prayer. They stood facing each other, 2 people who had once shared everything, now separated by years of silence and unspoken words. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Nathan noticed fine lines around her mouth that spoke of smiles and sorrows he had not witnessed. She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, carrying a weight he couldn't name, but somehow felt responsible for. They spoke in careful pleasantries at first, dancing around the elephant in the room. Emily told him about her bookstore, a cozy place on Main Street, where she hosted reading clubs and community events. She spoke with genuine passion about connecting people with stories, about creating a space where the town could gather and share ideas. Nathan listened, fascinated by the life she had built while he was chasing his fortunes elsewhere. When he told her about his business, about the properties he developed and the deals he closed, the words felt hollow. Next to her simple joy in running a bookstore, his accomplishments seemed cold and impersonal. He had built towers of steel and glass, but she had built something that actually mattered to real people. As the evening wore on, Nathan's mother orchestrated a moment for them to slip away from the crowd. They found themselves on the hall's back porch, overlooking the park where they had spent countless afternoons as teenagers. The swings still stood in the same spot, though the chains looked rustier now. Emily leaned against the railing, her gaze distant. Nathan studied her profile, noticing details he had missed before. There was a sadness in her posture, a resignation that seemed at odds with the vibrant girl he remembered. She had always been the one who believed in possibilities, who saw potential in everything and everyone. Nathan asked why she never left Willowbrook, why she hadn't pursued the dreams they used to discuss under these same stars. Emily was quiet for a long moment before answering. She spoke of responsibilities and choices, of paths not taken, and roads that chose her instead. Her father had fallen ill shortly after Nathan left, she explained. Someone needed to care for him, and she was all he had. The revelation hit Nathan like a physical blow. While he was building his empire, Emily had been here, sacrificing her own dreams to care for her father. She had faced that challenge alone, never reaching out, never asking for help. He asked why she hadn't told him, and her answer was simple and devastating. She had not wanted to be the anchor that dragged him down. the obligation that kept him from his potential. As they talked, Nathan noticed Emily glancing at her phone repeatedly, a worried crease forming between her eyebrows. When he asked if everything was all right, she assured him it was fine, just checking in with her babysitter. Shh. The word hung in the air between them like a revelation. Nathan felt his heart skip. Emily had a child. The knowledge settled over him with unexpected weight, bringing with it a cascade of questions he had no right to ask. She offered no explanation, and he didn't press, though curiosity burned through him like wildfire. Emily said she needed to leave soon, that she couldn't stay out late. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of longing and fear that Nathan couldn't decipher. She suggested they meet for coffee the next day, if he had time before returning to his life in the city. He agreed immediately, perhaps too eagerly, and watched as she gathered her things and said goodbye to his mother. Standing on the porch alone, Nathan watched Emily's modest car disappear down the tree-lined street. Something had shifted inside him, some dormant part of his heart awakening after years of sleep. He had come to Willowbrook expecting a brief visit, a dutiful appearance at his mother's celebration. Instead, he found himself confronting the biggest question of his life. What if the success he had chased so desperately had cost him something far more valuable? What if the life he thought he wanted was not the life he actually needed? And most importantly, what secrets lay hidden in Emily's careful words and guarded expressions? As the autumn wind rustled through the maple trees, Nathan realized his visit to Willowbrook was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. What do you think he'll discover over coffee? Let me know your theories in the comments. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of Nathan and Emily's story. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the lace curtains in my childhood bedroom. I woke earlier than usual, my mind already racing with thoughts of Emily. The coffee shop she'd suggested was a small place called Rosewood Cafe, tucked between the hardware store and the old barber shop on Main Street. I arrived 10 minutes early, surprising myself with my own eagerness. The cafe was charming, with mismatched wooden chairs, local art on the walls, and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee. I chose a corner table by the window, watching Willowbrook slowly wake up. Shop owners unlocking doors, neighbors greeting each other. It was a rhythm of life I'd completely forgotten, so different from the frantic pace of the city. Emily arrived right on time, wearing jeans and a cream sweater that made her look just like the girl I remembered from high school. She had her hair in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no pretense. She looked more real, more approachable, and somehow more beautiful than she had at the party. We ordered coffee and pastries, making small talk at first, but once we sat down, the conversation quickly went deeper. She asked about my journey from Willowbrook to Millionaire, and I found myself telling her everything. The early years struggling in the city, working 3 jobs while studying at night, the first small property purchase, the calculated risks, the expansion of my empire. But as I spoke, the story sounded hollow, even to my own ears. I had wealth and status, but what did I really have? I lived alone in a penthouse, worked 70-hour weeks, and couldn't remember my last meaningful conversation. My life was full of transactions but empty of connections. Emily listened without judgment. When I finished, she smiled gently and said, "Success means different things to different people. For some, it's money. For others, it's something simpler, more profound." Then I turned the conversation to her, asking about her bookstore. Her face lit up as she described her little shop, how she'd taken over the struggling business 5 years ago and turned it into a community hub. She hosted book clubs, reading hours for kids, poetry nights. The store barely broke even, but it was rich in the ways that mattered to her. As she talked, though, I noticed shadows cross her face. I gently asked about her father, and the dam finally broke. She told me everything she'd held back. His illness had been devastating emotionally and financially. The medical bills consumed their savings, forcing her to drop out of college after just 1 semester. She came home to care for him, watching the vibrant man who raised her slowly fade away. The pain in her voice was still so fresh. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was calloused from hard work and sacrifice. She held on tightly as if drawing strength from the contact. Then she confessed something that made my chest tighten with guilt. Before her father got sick, Emily had been accepted to a prestigious university with a full scholarship to study literature. She had planned to leave Willowbrook just 2 months after I did, ready to chase her own dreams. The acceptance letter arrived the same week as her father's diagnosis. The choice was simple, even if it wasn't easy. Family came first. The weight of that revelation settled over me. While I was out building a fortune, Emily was here, quietly giving up everything for the person she loved. She never complained, never asked for help, never blamed anyone. Her strength humbled me in a way my business achievements never could. Emily checked her phone, and a soft expression came over her face as she read a message. I asked about her child, trying to keep my voice casual. She hesitated, then told me about Sophie, her 6-year-old daughter who loved books as much as she did. She described Sophie as bright and curious, always creating elaborate stories. The way Emily spoke about her was transformative. The tiredness in her features was replaced by pure joy and fierce love. She showed me photos on her phone, a beautiful little girl with dark curls and sparkling eyes. I studied each picture, seeing traces of Emily in her features, but also something else I couldn't quite place. I asked about Sophie's father, a surprising knot of jealousy tightening in my chest. Emily's expression immediately shuddered. She said it was complicated, that he wasn't part of their lives, and that she preferred not to discuss it. The finality in her voice closed the subject, but my mind swirled with questions. What kind of man would abandon them? How had she managed alone? And why did looking at Sophie's picture give me this inexplicable feeling of connection? We spent another hour talking, drifting between past and present. Emily asked if I ever thought about the life I might have had if I stayed in Willowbrook. The honest answer was yes, more often than I cared to admit. I'd always dismissed those thoughts as nostalgia, but sitting across from her, seeing what she'd built with so little, wondered if I'd sacrificed the wrong things. She mentioned she needed to pick up Sophie from school. Before I could stop myself, I asked if I could meet her daughter. Emily looked surprised, then uncertain. She explained that she was protective of Sophie's world. But something in my face must have convinced her, because she finally agreed, suggesting I come by the bookstore later that afternoon. As we left the cafe, I noticed Emily seemed nervous, fidgeting with her bag and avoiding my gaze. I asked if something was wrong, but she just smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She promised to see me at the bookstore at 3, then drove away, leaving me on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. I felt this powerful pull, something more than attraction, deeper than nostalgia. It felt like destiny calling me back to a path I'd abandoned years ago. I spent the afternoon walking through Willowbrook, seeing my hometown through new eyes. The park where we studied, the diner where we shared meals, the old bridge where we carved our initials. Everything was smaller than I remembered, but somehow more significant. At precisely 3 o'clock, I stood outside Willowbrook Books. The shop was just as I'd imagined, cozy and warm, with a hand-painted sign. Through the glass, I saw Emily helping a customer, her face animated. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door, a small bell announcing my arrival. Our eyes met across the shelves. She smiled, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. Then I heard it, a child's voice from the back of the store, calling for her mother. Light footsteps, and a little girl with bouncing dark curls appeared from behind a bookshelf, running to Emily's side. She stopped when she saw me, her curious eyes studying me with an intensity that seemed far beyond her years, and I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Because now, seeing Sophie in person, I recognized what I'd missed in the photos. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head. These weren't just Emily's features. They were my own, reflected back at me in the face of a child I never knew existed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The air left my lungs, the room spun. Emily watched me, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. She had kept this secret for 7 years. But now, with me standing in her store, looking at our daughter, the walls were finally crumbling. And everything I thought I knew about my life, my choices, and my future was about to change forever. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Nathan stood motionless in the bookstore, his eyes darting between Emily and Sophie, words failing him. The little girl smiled with innocent curiosity, unaware she had just shattered and rebuilt her father's world. Emily's face went pale, her hands gripping the counter for support. Sophie broke the silence, asking her mom who the tall man was. Emily's voice trembled as she introduced Nathan as an old friend from school. The child accepted this, then asked if he liked books. He managed a nod, saying he loved them. Emily suggested Sophie show him her favorite section, a clear plea for a moment to compose herself. Sophie took his hand without hesitation, her small fingers wrapping around his with trusting ease. She led him to a corner filled with children's books, chattering about dragons and princesses. Nathan listened, his mind spinning, his heart breaking and mending with her every word. She was remarkable. She had Emily's warmth, but also a fierce intelligence that reminded Nathan of himself. He felt a protective love so immediate it nearly brought him to his knees. After 20 minutes, Emily called Sophie to the back office for homework. The child hugged Nathan goodbye, leaving the two adults alone among the shelves, surrounded by 7 years of secrets. Nathan spoke first, his voice rough. He asked Emily directly if Sophie was his daughter, though he already knew the answer. Emily met his gaze, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and confirmed what his heart had recognized. Yes, Sophie was his. The confession opened a floodgate of questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Her answer came in broken pieces. She discovered the pregnancy after he'd left, just as he was starting his new life. She saw him chasing his dreams and couldn't bring herself to call him back. She drafted countless letters, started phone calls, but always stopped. She believed telling him would destroy everything he was working toward, that he would feel obligated to return, sacrificing his future for responsibility. She couldn't do that to him, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. Nathan listened, anger and understanding at war within him. Part of him wanted to rage at her for stealing 7 years of his daughter's life. But another part understood the selfless love that motivated her choice. He told her she was wrong, that he deserved to know, that he would have wanted to be there. Emily quietly admitted she'd replayed that decision 1,000 times, but as months turned to years, the secret became harder to reveal. She shared how difficult the early years were pregnant, while caring for her dying father, working odd jobs to get by. She had Sophie alone in the hospital, then brought her home to a small apartment, juggling an infant and her father's medical needs. There were nights she thought she wouldn't make it. When her father passed, she was truly alone, but used his life insurance to take over the failing bookstore, slowly transforming it into the thriving community space it was today. Nathan asked if he could spend time with Sophie. Emily hesitated. She explained that Sophie knew her father was someone her mother had loved who could unbe part of their lives. It was simpler, less painful. But she recognized Nathan's rights. She made him promise one thing. If he entered Sophie's life, he could not leave again. A child could survive without a father, but not being abandoned by one they'd learned to love. Nathan gave his word without hesitation. Walking away was no longer an option. They agreed on a gradual approach. Nathan would spend time with them casually, building a relationship with Sophie before revealing the truth. Over the next week, he became a fixture at the bookstore. He abandoned his plans to return to the city, making excuses to his business partners. Each afternoon, Sophie's face would light up when he arrived. They read books, built stories, and took walks in the park. Nathan fell deeper in love with his daughter with each passing hour. Emily watched their bond grow with mixed emotions. She was grateful Nathan embraced fatherhood, but feared what his presence meant for their simple life. She worried he'd grow bored, and that his enthusiasm would fade. Nathan sensed her doubts and worked to prove them wrong. He helped at the store, attended Sophie's school play, and even learned to braid her hair by watching online tutorials, weaving himself into the fabric of their lives. One evening, after Sophie was asleep, they sat on the couch talking. He told her about the emptiness of his life in the city, his beautiful but sterile penthouse. He worked constantly because there was no one waiting for him at home. Coming here, meeting Sophie, and seeing Emily again showed him what he was missing. This was real success. A child's laughter, shared meals, conversations that mattered more than profit margins. He had built an empire of glass and steel, but Emily had built something far more valuable with love and sacrifice. He took her hand and told her he wanted to stay, to be a real father to Sophie. And maybe, if she was willing, to explore what might exist between them. Emily's eyes widened with cautious hope. She reminded him that staying meant giving up his life in the city, his business. He smiled, saying he wasn't giving up anything that truly mattered. He could manage his company remotely. What he couldn't do was return to his empty life, knowing his daughter was growing up without him. Then Emily asked the real question. Was he staying for Sophie, or for both of them? He looked into her eyes and answered with complete honesty. He was staying because Sophie was his daughter, and he loved her. But he was also staying because Emily was the person he should have fought for 15 years ago, and he wasn't making that mistake twice. 2 weeks later, they sat Sophie down. Emily held her hand while Nathan knelt at her level. Together, they explained he wasn't just a friend, but her father. The little girl processed this with remarkable composure, her intelligent eyes moving between them. She asked where he'd been, and if he was staying forever. Nathan answered each question honestly, promising to be there for everything that came next. Sophie thought for a moment, then asked if this meant they could be a real family. Nathan smiled and told her yes, they absolutely could. She launched herself into his arms, whispering she had always wanted a father. 6 months later, Nathan stood in the park where he and Emily had carved their initials long ago. He added Sophie's, making their family complete on the old tree. His life was nothing like he'd imagined, but it was infinitely better. He'd sold his penthouse, and the bookstore was now a community hub. Emily was finally writing her novel. They hadn't rushed into romance, but built their relationship slowly, becoming partners in parenting first. Love grew in the spaces between shared responsibilities and quiet conversations. Nathan had discovered true wealth wasn't in bank accounts. It was in breakfast conversations, bedtime stories, and the way Sophie called him daddy. It was in Emily's smile and the feeling of belonging he'd searched for in all the wrong places. Emily appeared on the path, holding Sophie's hand. Sophie ran ahead, calling for her father to push her on the swings. Nathan jogged to catch her, lifting his daughter high into the air. Emily joined them, and together they created new memories where old dreams had once begun. The millionaire had come home expecting nothing and found everything. In the golden light of Willowbrook, surrounded by his family, Nathan knew with absolute certainty that he was finally completely home.